I'd now like to go on to Michael. And yes, I'll say good evening in Prestwich to you, Michael. Good evening, Michael. And just a little bit about Michael, but not a lot, because he's obviously going to be speaking about his late parents. Michael was brought up in Prestwich, and he went to local schools, including local Jewish schools in this area. He then went to university, and he's pretty clever as well. He studied economics, got a degree in economics, and he's been an accountant for many, many years. I think he said 1984. In fact, somebody mentioned his name to me the other day. I said, which Michael do you mean? And the answer was, you know, Michael, the accountant. So over to you, Michael, the accountant, to tell us the story of your late parents. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, I'm, as you know, talking about my parents, and it's a very different story. So my name is Michael Rubinstein. I'm the son of two survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. Abraham Joseph, known as Joe Rubinstein, and Alice Rubinstein, née Hagenau. I'm going to tell you their stories. My father, Joe, was from the little village of Solec nad Vistula, or Wistula, in Poland, born into a very poor Hasidic Jewish family on the 20th of October, 1924. He was the seventh of 9 children, and he was the only one of his family to survive the Holocaust. My father used to say that where he lived was like the little village in the film of Fiddler on the Roof, and his family's life was very much like that portrayed in the film. He didn't speak much of his growing up, but some of the stories he did tell told of a happy, if rebellious childhood, but one blighted by anti-Semitism in Poland. One example, on the way home from school, he was often set upon by a gang of the Catholic boys. On one occasion, he loaded his satchel with rocks and used it to protect himself against the gang. After that, they left him alone. But the Catholic priest in the school severely beat just him. When the war came, his family was deported, initially to the ghetto in Radom, the main city of the district. He would regularly escape from the ghetto on missions to get food for his family. The chronology of his war, together with some events, was as follows. In 1940, the ghetto in Radom. In the liquidation of the ghetto, his sister Safiya, who was pregnant, her son Shlomo, their grandfather Pinchas, and their cousins were beaten to death. This followed the deportation of his mother Rosa, his father Hirsch, his pregnant sister Gittel, his younger brother Yankel, and younger sister Pearl. His aunts, uncles, and cousins, and almost all his extended family were killed at this time. My nieces Suzanne Cantor, Gemma Lowe, and Laura Nathan, who are here tonight, were named after their 3 great aunts, Safiya, Pearl, and Gittel. In 1941, he was in a camp in Pionki, near Radom. This is where he met his close friend, Cllr Ahmed. One day he was coming back from his shift. They were near some large open latrines where they had to sit on wooden planks to relieve themselves. People often fell in and died. One day they were put on parade and were called filthy Jews who would have to eat their own filth. In 1942, he was in Auschwitz. In 1943, he was in Sachsenheim, Natzweiler, Kochendorf, and time in salt mines. In 1944, it was Dachau and the death marches to Innsbruck, which was 150 kilometers. These started one day after finishing work. Without warning, he with thousands of others would just march for a day and a night, and then they were sat down in an open space with no food or drink for 5 days. This was in the winter of 1944. Of the thousands who marched, only around 200 survived. He had to march for several weeks with very little food in the Austrian winter. he reached a time when he could barely carry on, when he had a lucky opportunity. A German soldier asked him to carry his bag. Just after, there was an air raid, and in the darkness, amid the confusion, he got away from the soldier, and he shared the ration of jam, margarine mixed together with his friend Charlie Eigelman. Without this, they would have died. He was liberated in 1945 at Mittenwald near Innsbruck. When the war ended, my father Joe weighed 35 kilograms, had TB, and had survived typhus. He was mentally and physically an empty shell. My mother, Alice Hagenau, was born August 1925 in Altena, an upscale borough of Hamburg, to an observant but modern Jewish family. She had one brother, Manfred, who suffered from epilepsy. The family were comfortably off with a pleasant apartment and a maid. My grandfather, Arnold, was a chartered auctioneer and import-export agent. He had served in the trenches of the Western Front, fighting in the German army in the First World War, during which he had been decorated. After 1933 and the election of Hitler and the Nazis, when anti-Jewish laws were introduced, my grandfather's ability to trade was very much curtailed until eventually he was forced to close his business. My mother told us just a few stories. For example, how he used to mend their shoes because he enjoyed it. She never realized it because with the Nazis stopping him working, he had no money for new shoes. She would tell us of the neighbor who would always greet them with Heil Hitler and about how they had to move to smaller and smaller apartments and eventually share with another family. She told us of Kristallnacht, when two Gestapo officers came in long leather coats to arrest my grandfather to take him away. They were courteous with him and polite because he had a distinguished war record. They referred to him as Herr Hagenau rather than what they might have done. At that time, he came back after a few days. She told us the story of how, as a young girl, she saw a crowd of people going in the same direction, and so she followed them. They were all going to see Hitler being driven through the streets. So my mother, as a young child, saw Hitler being driven through the streets of Hamburg, standing, arm upstretched, in the back of his large Mercedes with the crowds cheering him. I don't think there's many people who in this country could say that. My uncle Manfred was sent to England to escape the deportations and killings of the disabled. It was sent in 1938. My mother was sent on the Kindertransport in June 1939. Her father couldn't go to the ship to say goodbye because he was just so upset. Arnold and Amelie Hagenau were deported to Riga in 1931, where they were shot into an open grave along with thousands of others. Alice was taken in by a Jewish family in Cheetham Hill, but was sadly unable to continue with her education. When she was 16, she started work. 15, I think, actually. Her boss, during the war, told her she should not tell anyone that she was Jewish, and if necessary, just say that she was German. Otherwise, she would not be welcome there. Although she encountered other examples of anti-Semitism, not everyone was like this, and many were very kind. When my father came to England in 1945, he and other survivors were taken to a large mansion in Southampton for rehabilitation. This was similar to what you may have seen in the Windermere Boys TV film. He made his way to Manchester with other survivors and trained to be a bespoke tailor. He eventually opened a business on Bayney Road near Strangeways, where quite a few of his friends also traded. He met my mother in around 1948 at the Springfield Jewish Social Club, frequented by the boys. When my parents came to England, the country was at war and just recovering from war. They were unusual times. My parents were very wary of anti-Semitism, but what there was did not compare with what they had left behind. There were anti-Semitic riots in the UK due to the situation in the British Mandate of Palestine, and my father and his friends had to learn to deal with that. But by then, however, they were physically and mentally much stronger. My parents married in 1952, a few months after the death of Manfred, my uncle, aged 29. They had 3 children. Their first apartment, by what is now Broughton Baths, was rat infested, but like so many immigrants, they were determined to make a better life for their families. They were very sociable people. My father would regularly bring unexpected guests home for dinner, leave my mother to cater at the very last moment. But they're very social people, but there are 3 things in their lives which matter to them most. Their family, which included their fellow survivors, their Jewishness, and the state of Israel. They were determined that nothing like what had happened to them should ever happen to the Jewish people again. Their people had been persecuted throughout history and it had to stop. But it was not just their own people they cared about. My parents loved living in Manchester. My father was a big Manchester United fan. They travelled around, they saw lots of people. And I think the life after I was born is just the life of people, ordinary middle-class people living in Manchester. But they were very gregarious, got to know very, very many people. My father died on the 19th of October, 1992. The last thing he did was to get us to help him stand up for his final roll call. My mother died the 21st of October, 2019, the exact same date in a Jewish calendar as my father at almost the same time. It was a Jewish festival of Shemini Atzeres. Playing on the radio was a theme from Schindler's List. One of the last things she asked me was, are the people in Israel okay? She meant all of the people there, not just the Jewish people. My mother was inclusive. She did not bear grudges. She had anger against the German people, but only those of a certain age. She always used to say, you can't blame the children. It wasn't their fault. I feel that I have been inspired by my parents' lives and examples, which is why I set up the Human Rights, Racism and Anti-Semitism Committee, the Jewish Representative Council. So many of us here share similar experience of dislocation and racism. We all have our own stories. At difficult times like these, we need to remember that members of the Muslim Jewish Forum, the Muslim and the Jewish communities are cousins, and that our communities should come together to show the world and those who choose war that there is a different way. Those who can should come together and jointly light that way. Thank you.